Harriet Candleton had weathered countless curious visitors in her little shop, but the stranger who appeared in her doorway one grisly afternoon was different. He was tall but hunched, clad in a wool coat quite out of season, with a collar that brushed his cheekbones. His eyes peeked out from beneath the brim of a shapeless hat, scanning her shelves of glistening tapers, scented pillars, and novelty wax figurines. Something about him, perhaps the fading bruise near his temple, or the tightness of his mouth, put Harriet's nerves on edge. She had been tending to her candle-making business, called Candleton's Light, ever since she inherited her grandfather's workshop. The shop occupied a squat, stone-walled building at the far end of Marrow Moor's main street, just past an iron fence that enclosed the Moor's churchyard. The local townsfolk adored Harriet's creations, from her rose-infused tea lights to her thick, pewter-held pillars, meant to crackle and sparkle like miniature fires. They chatted warmly with her when they came to browse, or to place special orders for birthdays and evening soirees. But this man was no such customer. His gaze lingered too long on the back corner, where Harriet displayed her rarest wax blends. It had taken her years to perfect the consistency. Pure beeswax mixed with a resin from an old apothecary's recipe, rarely requested, except by candle connoisseurs. And in recent memory, no one had specifically come for that wax, unless they had a special reason. "Lovely day," Harriet said, voice timid but polite. The man nodded curtly. "I need your most unusual wax," he murmured, stepping toward that far corner. "I hear you keep a private stock." It was Harriet's first indication he'd done research, because she never advertised it. She swallowed her mounting caution and said, "Yes, I do keep a few small blocks. Extra refined. While it's a bit pricey, I assure you it's the best for certain specialized uses." Harriet hardly ever parted with that kind of wax. Its composition was tricky to handle. It burned in strange patterns and had an almost hypnotic glow. Of course, some insisted it was just a novelty, but the stories Harriet's grandfather had told her suggested the wax had held secrets for centuries. She tried not to look too surprised when the man fished a meager stack of notes from a worn leather wallet colored a peculiar shade of ochre. The bills turned out to be more than enough to buy the entire block. Quiet conversation was not the stranger's forte. He accepted his purchase in a plain cloth bag Harriet provided, offered no name, and strode out of Candleton's Light without so much as a goodbye. But Harriet could still feel his presence several minutes after the bell above her door jangled, leaving her alone with the echoes of drizzle on the window. She glanced toward the back of the shop, where the empty shelf told her she'd parted with something valuable. Her mind churned with questions. Why had he needed that wax? What project could he possibly be planning with something so specialized? She pressed a hand to her heart, steadying herself, then went back to the storeroom. She planned to finish pouring a few custom cinnamon-scented votives. As she carefully measured melted beeswax into a pitcher, she realized her mind was too distracted to keep track of them. She stepped away from the pot for a moment, took a breath, and felt a flutter of unease. Later that evening, after the day's tasks were done, Harriet prepared for her customary bedtime ritual, burning one of her favorite test candles in her small reading nook. She selected a half-used pillar, known for its gentle, honey-like aroma, and set it on the windowsill while she sat with a cup of chamomile tea. She pulled a thick crocheted blanket over her knees, cracked open a worn paperback mystery, and read by the flickering glow. But her reading was soon interrupted. The flame's flicker took on an odd urgency. Harriet frowned, suspecting a draught. She rose to close the window, but a gust of wind swam across the sill, making the flame shudder. It quivered once, twice, then suddenly stabilized, swelling into a brighter glow. For one extraordinary moment, Harriet found herself mesmerized. Something about the pattern of the flicker felt alive, like a heartbeat. A curious sequence of pulses caught her attention. Flick, 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 pause, flick, 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 pause. She set her book aside. Her breath caught. Harriet had seen many a dancing flame in her time, but never had she perceived it as such a deliberate pattern. It looked almost like Morse code. She gently wrapped her hand around the candle's base, trying not to disturb the flame, and stared. The pulses repeated themselves, beckoning her to decode them. Yet Harriet didn't know Morse code by heart, so the meaning was lost. The next day broke sunny and bright, though it might have done little to shake Harriet's misgivings. Still, she went through her usual routine of opening the shop, dusting shelves, labelling new stock, and waiting for customers under the softly chiming bell overhead. She told herself that the flickering from the night before had just been her imagination. She was overthinking. She forced herself to greet her neighbours with a smile, though inside, the memory of those coded pulses still lingered. It was nearly lunchtime when the bell tinkled and Sarah Hillstride strolled through the door. With her short-cropped hair and bright floral dress, Sarah was a comforting sight on any day. A self-made genealogist and hobby archivist for Marrow Moor, she was Harriet's oldest friend. "Busy morning?" Sarah asked, glancing around at the quiet shop. "Not really," Harriet sighed. "There's something on my mind." She hesitated, telling Sarah might make her sound silly, but the thought of facing these strange happenings alone made her uneasy. Sarah raised an eyebrow, then perched on a stool near the counter. "You look worried." After drawing a breath, Harriet recounted the odd visit from the stranger and the curious coded flicker in her candle flame. Sarah listened intently, resting her chin on one hand. "Morse code, you say?" Sarah said once Harriet finished. "I'd be lying if I said that didn't sound far-fetched, but if you really think it was a message—" "I'm not certain," Harriet admitted, "but it felt purposeful. And that man, he paid far too much for that block of special wax. Something is off." Sarah pressed a hand to Harriet's shoulder in a reassuring gesture. "I know a bit of Morse code from my time working in the local archives. We had to reference old telegraph letters once. Maybe if you see it again, you can write down the sequence, and we can look it up." The suggestion comforted Harriet. They made a loose plan. Harriet would try to note the pattern if it reappeared, then pass it on to Sarah. In the meantime, Sarah promised to keep an ear out for mention of a stranger in town searching for obscure wares. That evening, Harriet found herself standing in her modest kitchen, staring at the same candle she had used the night before. Although she lit it again out of curiosity, the flame refused to dance in that cryptic, pointed way. Disappointed and oddly relieved, Harriet set it aside. Perhaps she truly had dreamed up that coded flicker. However, the following afternoon, Harriet had almost finished closing up the shop when the overhead lights browned out for a brief second. A sudden hush fell over the late-day gloom. The air, charged with static, made Harriet's skin prickle. She froze, cloth in hand, in the act of cleaning a display shelf. Then the lights snapped back, humming faintly. Just a power surge, Harriet told herself, letting her eyes roam the store to ensure nothing was amiss. Her gaze involuntarily landed on a newly poured candle made from the tail end of her rare wax stash. The suspicious stranger hadn't bought every last bit. He'd purchased a large block, but Harriet had enough leftover scraps to mix into a few small tapers. Now one of those tapers stood front and center on the cluttered workstation, unlit. A sudden urge nudged Harriet. She fetched her lighter, clicked the flame to life, and ignited the taper. Standing close, she studied the burn. The flame started steady, normal. Then, within half a minute, it began to flicker in that distinctive pulsing pattern. Heart pounding, Harriet scrambled for her notepad. She pressed the pencil tip to the paper and tried to mark down the flicks, ignoring how silly she felt. Flick, flick, pause. Flick, 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 pause. Flick, pause. The pattern repeated until she'd gathered a string of dots and dashes. At least that's how she imagined them. It seemed unstoppable, as though some invisible hand guided the flame. When the flickering finally subsided, Harriet had several lines of scribbled dots and dashes in front of her. She snuffed the candle, trembling with excitement, and carefully tucked the paper into her apron. Knowing Sarah would be at the local library late into the night, Harriet pulled on her coat and hurried across the moonlit cobblestones. Once inside the library's warm hush, she spotted Sarah at a table piled with old genealogical records. Harriet crept over, offering an apologetic smile for her unannounced arrival. But with a start, Sarah looked up. "Harriet, you pale as a ghost. Did something else happen with that candle?" Harriet's eyes shone with the tension of discovery. She produced the notepad. "I counted the flickers. Here, they form something like a code." Sarah motioned for Harriet to sit. The two bent their heads over the scribbled lines. "Let's see," Sarah said. She used her phone to pull up a simple Morse code reference. Carefully, they translated Harriet's dots and dashes. EBWARETHEMARKGGAVE, Sarah read slowly, eyebrows drawing together as she pieced it out. When the phrase was complete, they stared at each other. "Beware the Mark Grave," Harriet repeated. "That's a name? Or a title? What on earth does that mean?" Sarah bit her lip. "Mark Grave? Could it be a place? Or a person? It almost sounds medieval." "I have no idea," Harriet said, turning the words over in her mind. "But I recall hearing that name in my grandfather's stories. Something about an old local legend. He used to talk about a Lord Markgrave, who was said to have hidden something in the moor." Sarah wasted no time rummaging through the library's local history shelves. Within minutes, she found a slim volume about Marrow Moor's aristocratic families, complete with genealogical charts and rumour-laden footnotes. Harriet placed it on the table, and they skimmed. Printed on one of the yellowing pages was a reference. "Lord Almeric Markgrave, occupant of Marrow Moor's Stonewreath Hall in the 17th century, rumoured practitioner of occult candle-making. Vanished under suspicious circumstances." Harriet felt a chill. Occult candle-making? That's so eerily specific. My family's craft does have old roots in the region, but I never thought to connect them to a rumoured occultist. "Seems you're inadvertently stepping into something unique," Sarah said grimly. "Or maybe it's that stranger who's revived it." A wave of unease swept Harriet. She set the book aside. So, the code spelled out a warning. "Beware the Markgrave." Could it be pointing me to some danger? Or that the stranger is searching for Markgrave's secrets? Sarah shrugged, carefully shelving the volume. If the coded message is truly something beyond the realm of coincidence, perhaps it's urging caution. Let's not ignore it. We should be vigilant. You should be vigilant. In the days that followed, Harriet found herself unable to focus on the ordinary hum of daily life. Each candle she poured, each wick she trimmed, reminded her of that flickering message. She spent her free time scouring her grandfather's old diaries, hoping to see mention of either Markgrave or hidden codes. Halfway through a dusty ledger, Harriet stumbled on a curious entry. In looping handwriting, it mentioned, "Lord Markgrave's final candle, rumoured to be made with black resin extracted from the hearts of elder trees, was said to reveal secrets of the moor." The note went on to say that Harriet's ancestors had tried to replicate that candle, but never fully succeeded. Harriet sat back, heart-pounding. Secret candle, secret code, the stranger's interest in the rare wax. All of it seemed tied together like twisted wicks. Harriet scribbled some notes of her own, then closed the ledger. The shadows in her storehouse seemed to grow long. That evening, Harriet braved the chilly dusk to walk to the old Stonewreath Hall, a once grand estate on the outskirts of Marrow Moor. It had been abandoned for some time, its stone towers crumbling beyond salvage. She wanted to see if the stranger had set up shop in one of the outbuildings or was poking around. As she drew closer, Harriet noticed a dim light glowing in one of the turret windows. She gasped. She'd heard the entire place was condemned, the floors rotted, the ceilings near collapse. No one but the bravest teenagers or occasional superstitious thrill-seekers ventured in, yet here was definite light. Like a candle's glow, Harriet's breath plumed in the crisp air. She haltingly moved closer, the hair on her arms rising. Through the iron gate, she could just make out the shape of a figure moving inside the window. Perhaps it was that stranger, or maybe an equally mysterious trespasser. This was beyond Harriet's comfort zone. She didn't want to risk stumbling into a confrontation unprepared. She retreated as quietly as she could, dread gnawing at her. Back at her snug cottage, Harriet lit yet another leftover candle from her rare wax. She watched anxiously, half hoping for more flickering code. Sure enough, after a few minutes of calm burning, the flames sputtered in that dashed rhythm dance. Heart racing, Harriet pulled out her notepad and scribbled as fast as she could. Once the flame stilled again, Harriet translated the bits. SEALEDFINDKEY. She read it twice, swallowing. Secret is sealed. Find key. A flush of excitement rose in her cheeks. It felt like stepping into one of her childhood adventure novels, but the stakes were rattlingly real. A coded candle was instructing her to find a key to a sealed secret. Could it be referencing Stonewreath Hall? Maybe there was a hidden compartment, something locked away, and somehow Harriet's rare wax was the conduit for the message. The next morning, Harriet brought Sarah up to speed. The two met in Harriet's shop, flipping the closed sign so they could speak in private. "This is definitely pointing at Stonewreath Hall," Sarah said. "And that suspicious stranger you saw might be trying to break in or find something. If he's after Markgrave's secrets, maybe the message is urging you to stop him." Harriet stared at the patterns of sunlight on her counter. "I'm not sure how to proceed. Should I talk to the local police? They'd likely dismiss me if I told them my candle is giving me secret messages." Sarah pursed her lips. "They might. Let's see if we can gather more. We should try to figure out where a key might be hidden, or what it's for. We know Markgrave was rumoured to have vanished. Maybe he left behind a hidden chamber. Or some old crypt." Though wary, Harriet knew she couldn't ignore this puzzle. In the end, the two decided to return to Stonewreath Hall that evening, prepared with flashlights, camera phones, and Harriet's coded candle in a lantern. They'd see if the flame's flicker could guide them, or if they could locate a locked door or hidden grate. Dusk found them standing at the estate's ivy-choked gate. Sarah gently pried it open, and they approached the skeletal grandeur of the hall, where broken windows stared like empty eye sockets. The air smelt of damp stone and decaying leaves. Inside, the corridors lay thick with dust. Their flashlight beams revealed tattered curtains, chipped busts of forgotten ancestors, and scuff marks on the floor. Harriet felt her heart pounding. She pressed the candle lantern close to her, though she didn't light it yet. They tread carefully, mindful of weak floorboards, and soon located a spiral staircase leading to the upper floor. Harriet remembered the faint glow she'd seen in a turret window. So up they went, footsteps echoing on the creaking stone. Halfway up, they heard a scraping noise from above. Sarah and Harriet froze, exchanging tense looks. Harriet whispered, "We're not alone here." They continued more quietly. At the top of the stairs they emerged into a wide corridor lined with family portraits, whose colours had darkened to murk. A single door at the end stood ajar, light flickering within. Harriet inched forward, peering around the door's frame. There he was, the same stranger from Harriet's shop, hat discarded, coat laid on a dusty chair. A single candle burned on a half-toppled cabinet. She recognized the wax block's distinct coloration. He knelt beside a trunk, trying to pick its rusted lock with a small set of tools. Sarah's hand squeezed Harriet's shoulder, urging caution. Harriet took a slow breath, then stepped forward. "What are you doing?" she asked in a low but firm voice. The stranger whirled around, eyes wide. He clutched a half-rusted crowbar. "Who are you?" he demanded, though Harriet could tell he recognized her. "I might ask you the same question," Harriet said, steeling herself. "You bought that rare wax from me, and now you're here rummaging through Markgrave's haunt." The man's expression flickered between anger and fear. "I'm not rummaging, I'm searching for the truth about Lord Markgrave," he replied. "He was my ancestor. My name is Victor Markgrave." Harriet and Sarah exchanged startled glances. Could this be genuine? I've spent years researching my lineage, Victor continued. He set the crowbar aside. Stories claim Markgrave had secrets that could help restore my family name's honor, or so I thought. Now I'm just desperate to find any clue. Harriet's suspicions softened. She had expected a treasure hunter or a petty thief. And you needed my special wax to do that. Victor grimaced. Old records said Markgrave's final candle was no ordinary piece. It might reveal hidden inscriptions or guide someone to the sealed crypt. I needed to replicate that candle if I hoped to interpret or read any sign. That's why I needed your rarefied wax. His gaze flicked to the trunk. I think the key to the crypt is in here, but the lock's rusted shut, Sarah spoke up. The coded message we found said, "Secret is sealed, find key." So you're on the right track, presumably. Victor furrowed his brow. Coded message? Harriet explained about the candle flickers. Victor seemed rattled at the thought that the wax was communicating dire hints. He looked down at the trunk. If I can't open it, everything ends here, his voice quavered, a man at the end of his rope. Biting her lip, Harriet knelt. She eyed the trunk's hinges. Let me try something. She produced a small kit of tools from her coat, an inheritance from her tinkering grandfather. She began working at the lock, ignoring the dust caking her fingers. Eventually, after much scraping, the trunk's latch gave an ominous creak. Victor let out a shaky exhale. With a final heave, Harriet opened the lid. Inside lay a single wooden box, intricately carved with swirling designs. She lifted it out and placed it on the floor. Sarah ran her fingers lightly over the carvings. Look, there's an indentation here that looks like a stylized candle flame. Intrigued, Harriet reached for the small candle lantern at her side. She recalled the cryptic flicker messages. Something told her to light the candle now, so she did, carefully opening the lantern's glass panel and igniting the rare wax taper. The flame wavered, then blazed high. As Harriet brought the flame near the wooden box, faint lacquered lines shimmered. It was as if the wax's glow brought hidden inscriptions to life. The design spelled out archaic letters. He who seeks the truth must bring forth the light in darkest gloom. With a decisive nod, Harriet lowered the candle flame to the carved indentation. The tip of the flame licked the wood, and for a breathless moment nothing happened. But then, as if magnetized, the box's lid slid open on cunningly concealed hinges. Harriet almost dropped the lantern in surprise. Within the box lay a small metal key, archaic in design. Its bow was shaped like a stylized skull, or perhaps a crest. Victor's eyes widened. Could that be the key to Markgrave's crypt? Sarah peered at the old genealogical notes she had tucked in her bag. The Stonewreath Hall has a family crypt at the back of the estate near the old garden. This must be the key that unlocks it. Eager to finish what they'd started, they set off again, descending the creaky stairs, crossing the overgrown courtyard and finding the path that led to the crypt. The moon was full, casting silver-blue rays across the ruins. At the edge of a weed-choked garden, a squat mausoleum rose from the ground, its door sealed by a heavy iron gate. Harriet's small candle lantern illuminated an ornate crest above the door, certainly the Markgrave seal. The gate's lock was similarly rusted, though an ancient keyhole remained. With trembling fingers, Victor fit the newly found key into place. A heart-clenching moment passed as he twisted it, uncertain if it would work. Finally, the mechanism clicked. The gate swung open on shrieking hinges. Inside, the crypt smelled of earth and old stone. Lit by Harriet's candle, they saw a narrow walkway with carved alcoves along the walls. The hush pressed in around them, as if centuries of silence weighed the air. At the far end stood a raised sarcophagus with the Markgrave crest. Victor approached slowly, his footfalls echoing. He knelt beside it, brushing dust from its plaque. I supposed I'd find a diary, or proof that Markgrave was misunderstood, he murmured. There has to be something to exonerate him, to show that the rumors about black magic was slander. Perhaps he was just a scholar of obscure knowledge. My family has carried shame about him for generations. Harriet set the lantern on a low ledge, the flickering candlelight revealing faint etchings across the lid. Sarah joined her, running her flashlight beam over the inscriptions. Slowly, in carefully incised Latin, they read, "Let the flame's truth burn away fear. Here lies knowledge beyond measure." They saw no immediate compartments. Then Harriet noticed a round depression near the sarcophagus's base. It looked large enough for her candle lantern. With a soft prayer that she wasn't desecrating anything, Harriet set the lantern into the depression. Nothing dramatic happened at first. Then the flames surged higher, illuminating a carved motif near the floor. With the new light, Harriet spotted a concealed panel. She pressed it gently, and with a clack, a hidden door swung open at the base of the sarcophagus. Stale air rushed out, swirling dust motes in the candle's glow. Inside lay a leather-bound tome, its cover etched with the Markgrave crest. Victor gingerly lifted the book, eyes brimming with awe. He smoothed back the cover, revealing page after page of cramped writing, diagrams of candles and runes, incantations, or perhaps treatises on natural philosophy. Sarah skimmed a few lines. "It looks like a record of experiments with candle compositions. Some might call it mystical, but it could as well be early scientific exploration. Charts on how different waxes burn, how illusions can form through flickering light. Possibly Markgrave used the effect for coded messages as well, which might have been misconstrued as occult practice in his time." Victor's voice was thick with emotion. This could clear the Markgrave name. He wasn't a demon conjurer, he was an experimenter, an inventor. He harnessed illusions to pass messages, probably among secret societies. Now I can bring this knowledge to light. Harriet felt relief settled in her chest. The coded warnings from her own candles had led her here. So that's the secret. Markgrave's candle was a method of cryptic communication, like an advanced puzzle, to keep prying eyes away. Sarah nodded. All the rumors about black magic might have been misunderstandings of his advanced illusions. If you have this record, you can set the story straight. Victor clutched the tome. "Thank you. I'm sorry I frightened you when I came to your shop. This was so important to me that I feared anyone I encountered might try to sabotage my search." Harriet studied him in the warm glow of the candle. He no longer looked sinister or suspicious, just a man carrying the weight of a family's tarnished past. She offered a small smile. "I understand. I am glad we resolved this." They retraced their steps, leaving the mausoleum to the hush of the moor. Outside, the odd hush of midnight enveloped them. The storm of the previous day had passed, leaving the sky clear and speckled with stars. Sarah locked the iron gate behind them, returning the key to Victor, who promised to preserve it along with the family record. By the time Harriet and Sarah slipped back into Marrow Moor's winding streets, dawn was not far off. They parted ways with Victor, who offered them a grateful nod and an assurance he would soon leave for an academic institute to study the tome. Harriet watched him go, her heart lighter than it had been in days. Back home, Harriet snuffed out the sputtering candle lantern. She felt an odd pang of sadness at extinguishing the flicker that had led her to such revelations. Still, she was grateful. Without it, the lost secrets of Markgrave might have remained buried. Over the following weeks, word quietly spread among curious townsfolk that Harriet Candleton and Sarah Hillstride had uncovered a piece of Marrow Moor's hidden history. Something about an old crypt and a misunderstood lord. Most folks only heard the sanitized version, void of details about coded candle flames. Harriet preferred it that way. After all, some mysteries were best kept between those who had walked the dusty halls of Stonewreath Hall and seen the flickering truth for themselves. Harriet resumed her regular work, helping neighbors find the perfect candle for a gift or a romantic dinner. The days turned crisp with autumn's arrival, the moor's heather changing color in the distance on rare nights. She burned one last bit of that special wax, silently marveling at how a simple flame had guided them to an ancient secret. Instead of ominous code, the candle's flickers now felt comforting, as if Lord Markgrave's spirit had found peace. Harriet sensed no further messages in the dancing light, no more urgent pulses. It was simply a flame, warm and bright, a gentle reminder of the wonders hidden just beneath the surface of everyday life. One evening, as Harriet closed her shop, she placed a fresh display in the window, a few of her signature beeswax pillars, flanked by a discreet jar labeled Rare Wax Blend. She chuckled softly, knowing few people beyond her circle would ever guess the depth of its significance. Then she switched off the lights and locked up, stepping into the quiet street with a renewed sense of calm. Marrow Moor's lane glowed under the yellowed lamplights, and Harriet felt the night air brush against her cheek. She paused to look back at her shop, Candleton's Light, comforted by the faint tinge of wax and wick that lingered on her hands. If anyone else sought to uncover the secrets of flickering flames, perhaps Harriet would be ready, a keeper of coded messages, caretaker of Marrow Moor's quiet mysteries.